It is officially official. Ladies and gentlemen, we have the top four, the four teams that will be competing for the national championship. The 1v4 matchup, Ohio State and Georgia. The initial data suggests Georgia right around 5-point favorites in that game. And then we've got Michigan and TCU. That will be the Fiesta Bowl taking place in Arizona. Michigan right around 6.5-point favorites in that one. I'm going to give my quick instant reaction. We're going to have videos throughout the day when all the rankings come out. We had the AP poll come out. I want to do a video on that. When we get all the bowl games, I want to do a reaction on that. But just to talk about these two games that are going to be happening, I tweeted this out earlier. I said there's one thing for certain. Whoever faces Ohio State is playing at 8 o'clock. Whoever faces TCU is playing at 4:30. And guys, the interesting thing to think about, Michigan TCU happening at 4:30 in Arizona. That's a 1:30 start time in Arizona. That's no energy for that game at all, in my opinion. And, that will probably be lacking a little bit. I would expect Michigan to win that game. I think the biggest winner in these reveal would be Michigan. Because if you're Michigan, you much rather would avoid a rematch with a really talented team who's more healthy. Ohio State possibly getting the superstar receiver JSN back. So I think the big winner is Michigan. And the committee really went a little bit more by most deserving than the best team in general. Because if I was the committee and I really wanted to reward the number one overall seed, I would say, listen, TCU needs to be number 4. They deserve to face TCU in basically a bye in a game that's taking place on Georgia's home turf virtually. I'm sure Georgia's going to have the crowd advantage in the Peach Bowl. At least, I would say 65-35. I mean, Ohio State has a massive fan base, but it's lit right next to it. And then, obviously, if you're Ohio State, beggars can't be choosers. They did this to themselves. They had the opportunity to face TCU. All they needed to do was beat Michigan at home. And I think if Ohio State beats Michigan, we're in the exact same situation. It's just switched. So Michigan, by beating Ohio State, they basically won a free chance to face TCU in the semifinal game instead of playing Michigan or instead of playing Georgia in Atlanta. And really, Ohio State cannot complain about this. You're just happy to get into the playoff at this point. So the two matchups, I'll say, Georgia against Ohio State. Certainly, it's in Atlanta, Georgia. It's going to be a very good game. I would say the two most talented rosters by far in the playoffs, above both Michigan and TCU. And a lot of it's going to come down to health. I'm really high on Ohio State right now. I think when you look at the balance of college football, things tend to equalize, and there tends to be an equilibrium, and it just feels like Ohio State's going to win this game because Georgia won the national title last year. They're not going to be able to repeat. So I'm really liking Ohio State. I mean, we'll see what happens. We'll see all the data and things like that. I would assume Georgia's going to be the favorites, especially after Ohio State's performance against Michigan. And there are people that are saying, how can Ohio State make the playoff? Their last performance was so bad. That's just the reality of a 4-team playoff. It's going to happen, and it's even going to get worse if you don't like that when we get the 12-team playoff. So that is something people are going to have to adapt to, and this isn't, the BCS national, title thing where you just have two teams, which would be Georgia and Michigan, which some people would like. You're not going to have that in this situation. So the Georgia-Ohio State game is certainly the cream of the crop. There's a reason they're putting it at 8 o'clock. It is the primetime spotlight. And then the Michigan TCU is kind of like an appetizer. TCU is a team that fights, but really throughout the season, the teams that TCU has faced, the talent level has pretty much been even. Now they're facing, even or TCU has more talent, now they're facing a team that's more talented than them in Michigan. And I think, you can do this whole thing where you fall behind and you come back, but it's just not going to work at some point. So while I appreciate TCU for being in the playoff, Michigan is the exact if I'm a Michigan fan, I'm very happy about this matchup because Michigan, they don't get upset. They're fundamentally sound. And you're looking at TCU and you're saying, listen, this is for beating Ohio State. We're rewarded by facing a team that we're, a lot more talented than. We're going to be the favorites. And again, the thing with TCU, you can do the little comebacks against Oklahoma State, against Kansas State in the regular season, but at some point, it's just not going to happen. So I think Michigan very clearly is going to win that game. And then the Georgia-Ohio State game, I'll save my prediction on that. And then you did have the few other things I wanted to talk about during the show. They were trying, they really didn't do much of it, like the whole Alabama possibly inside the top 4. I thought they probably would have tried to do that a little bit more, although they did have some crazy graphics. I should have took a screenshot of one of the graphics. It was the total margin of loss. Like, that's Alabama's biggest thing on their resume. When you talk to an Alabama fan, the first thing they will mention, we lost 2 games by 4 points. That's the first thing. And the graphic showed total points from losses, and it had Ohio State at 22 points because they lost to Michigan by 22, and it had Alabama at 4, and who were the other? I don't even know. It had TCU maybe and one other team, but I just thought it was hilarious. So that was funny. But either way, guys, they end up putting Alabama at 5, Tennessee at 6. I don't think it really matters all that much, guys, to be completely honest. I know Tennessee fans are going to be pissed. Again, you win that game impressively, 52-49. I get it. But I don't think anyone was surprised with the top 4. And the only question would have been the dynamic of the Georgia situation, where I would assume that they would rather face TCU than Ohio State just based on overall talent distribution on the rosters. And obviously they're the number 1 seed, and you can say that Ohio State, they haven't lived up to their talent this year, so that's why they're number 4. But I do think TCU losing did open up a chance for the committee possibly to move Ohio State in front of TCU, and then the whole idea with the rematch, it would have been crazy for the ratings for sure. It can obviously still happen. I think it would really come down to Ohio State beating Georgia, because I do feel confident that Michigan will beat TCU, or at least fairly confident. Not 100% because I respect TCU, and it's not like to me, I think the most lopsided matchup of round 1 would have been TCU, Georgia in Atlanta. I think that would have been, such a distinct, it's like Cincinnati versus Alabama last year. So we don't really have one of those matchups this year, but it will be interesting to see. And then really pretty much all the other New Year's Six Bowls are set. I will do a different video talking about those, but there's no at-large spots this year. It's the only at-large spot, I believe, is going to USC in the Cotton Bowl, and they're facing Tulane. And the other thing I wanted to quickly talk about, Caleb Williams, guys, is still going to win the Heisman. And people, so I understand why people are questioning it, and they're like, who's going to win? But it really isn't close. Caleb Williams, it's kind of by default. He was really never thought of as a Heisman contender until 2 weeks ago. But C.J. Stroud lays an egg against Michigan. Blake Corum gets hurt. Hendon Hooker gets hurt. Bryce Young was just not good enough this year. Trying to win back-to-back Heismans is always tough. Will Anderson was a no-show on the defensive side. People are like, well, you need to give a Heisman to another position. There's no position to give it to. There were no defenders that had Heisman-type years. I want to give a Heisman to a defensive player, but there's just no one out there that had a worthy year. So Caleb Williams, he got blown out by Utah, but he actually still had good numbers. He had 3 touchdowns, 1 interception, 350 passing yards, a lot of rushing yards. So he's still going to win it, guys. It's fairly obvious. It'll be interesting to see who gets invited to the Heisman show, but in general, that is the official playoff, and I do think hopefully both of these games should be good. TCU seems to always play close games. Michigan's very fundamentally sound. Ohio State, you really don't know what you're going to get. With Ryan Day, he does tend to no-show in top 5 matchups outside of that Clemson game. in 2020, it's been tough. So he's going to have to pull something like that out. Just an update on JSN. I would say he would play for that game for Ohio State. There was always thought he'd be maybe back for Michigan, but certainly back for the playoffs. So he's been, saying stuff. I think he's going to be back for the playoffs if I had to guess right now on him, and that would be huge for Ohio State with Marvin Harrison Jr. But either way, guys, that is my instant reaction to the top 4 playoff teams. Not surprising. The only thing, maybe the seeding could be a little bit different, but they did. It's always a combination. It's a balance of most deserving and best, and I do think they did a good job with that. And once again, there's no 2-loss team in the playoff. And guys, another thing, strength of record is king. Every year, strength of record, no matter how wonky it looks mid-season, at the end of the year, it normally always gets the top 4 teams right. And if you look at the metrics, it had the exact order right, the strength of record, the ESPN metric. So just wanted to shout that out. But either way, guys, that's going to do it for this video. Make sure you're following me on Twitter. Link to that's always in the description.